Hello there. Very nice to see you. I appreciate I am here considerably earlier than I said I would be. But it's with good reason. I might be on later at 7 again. Unlikely though. But I wanted to do this webinar a little earlier to support some of the parents and people who've been in touch with me that want to be present for this one, right? So also I just got the wee nudge that it might be better just to do it now. Don't know why. I don't tend to overthink these things, right? So I'm just firing the webinar now on AuDHD and the nervous system, right? And we're going to be talking about connection to others from an educational and carers perspective. So this is relative to parents and to those who work in education settings with young people who are AuDHD. So I'm just firing it into relevant places. Now, I had I had one version of this, right, and it evolved over the week, which is sort of relevant to what we're speaking about here. That when we speak about ADHD and we speak of the evolution of the nervous system and also the well-being of the child, they are one and the same, right? And when we look at and frame ADHD differently, the solutions start to become more obvious to us. They become less elusive, less confusing, right? So that's kind of where I'm at. Now, for anyone who doesn't know who I am, my name is Shanice Freel. I am Company Director of Sincerity School CIC, and we are in the process of developing a school and an educational model that can be transferable across the globe for ADHD specific children. Right, so the neurotype of ADHD being catered for throughout the whole of the school curriculum and the model, and the construct of this is occurring immediately right now with a bunch of volunteer people from various different places, all walks of life. Many of them with a lot of experience, some researchers. We have a neuroscientist overseeing all of this, Dr. Joseph Delaney. I've mentioned him many, many times. Brilliant man. And many, many educators who are specialists in certain areas of special education, and others like myself who have come from mainstream and are lived experience ADHD individuals themselves. And I'm also a mum, right? So that makes a major difference to how I'll communicate this information, right? So I've got a presentation and I'm going to talk you through, and it's not very long and it's not very complicated. The last one that I did, very long, very complicated, right? This one, not so much, right? Which is great. So I'm going to just pop in now and pull up what we need to pull up, right? And just get into the right windows, etc. So if I just hop on in here, I want this to go away. How do I get that to go away? Right, I don't know. Right. Hold on, excuse me, nearly there, right? So this is our presentation. Today we're looking at ADHD and the nervous system, relating, learning, and growing up. And I've got some pictures of children here as well, which is really nice. Oh, how do I go backwards? Hold on, didn't mean to do that. Right, we'll go back a bit. Okay, there we are. So let's just get rid of this. Here we are. Understanding brain networks and their influence. So the ADHD human brain is different to a neurotypical brain in these simple ways. Relating with others gives lower reward and higher stress. And this is variable across a day, right? Less time in nature gives less energy for socializing. And again, this is variable across a day, a week, a year, depending on the circumstance and the environment. Learning depends on multiple environmental and sensory influences. Most environments aren't fitting for ADHD minds, and we'll go into some of the detail about that in a second. Growing up requires communication and relaxation. Without relaxation, communication is impossible, and without communication, relaxation is impossible. Now, what I have described here is somewhat, it's a bit of a meta statement, right? Because when I looked quite deeply into the brain networks over the last wee while, and what is important and relevant to this conversation will come up naturally. But what I understood of the AuDHD brain is that it responds differently, and these networks respond differently to the same circumstance. Now, what seemed to be apparent is that there's this gradient of influence internally that I've spoken about in previous presentations, the current of influence inside of the child, their own energy levels, their own sense of well-being internally, and how this can be in flux constantly all the time. When the brain networks are relating to an environment, to an external person, to a circumstance, the responses are different, right, to a neurotypical mind. And also they can sometimes be at odds with each other, right? So that statement, without relaxation, communication is impossible. Without communication, relaxation is impossible, actually applies to the child themselves in any environment where they need to be relaxed in order to communicate. And they also need communication from us in order to relax, right? That's one version of what that statement means. It also relates to the relationships between the brain networks. So the brain networks need relaxation in order to communicate at their optimum. And then in order for communication to come through, these networks need to stay in a state of relaxation, right? Or at least be able to move easily in between states, right? So receiving and putting out, receiving and putting out. There's a couple of instances here in this presentation where I go into more detail about this, but it might not sound like I'm speaking about neurobiology, and I am, right? So I've made it really, really clear and really simple for anyone who's watching, so we have a clear idea of what's going on in this presentation today. So what makes a nervous system change how it functions? Now, the AuDHD child needs to learn about their own body and how to relate to it. When looking at the neurobiology of the AuDHD person, it became clear that self-knowledge and experience of the self is extremely valuable for evolution and a prognosis of continual and gradual, safe, balanced, and harmonized well-being for the future. This relationship to self I spoke about in a little more detail in my first presentation, which is attached to the top of this profile. And if anyone wants to watch the connection to self one, you're very welcome to. There were a couple of methods I shared with regards to working with children who are dysregulated, where it might be useful to you there. But specifically here, we deepen that knowledge of self a little bit. The AuDHD child needs to learn about their own body and how to relate to it from a unique perspective and from their own perspective. The child's self-knowledge and allowing for them to discover themselves, both their body, sensory, mental, emotional processes, the subtle and not so subtle feelings of fluctuation inside of themselves, their own energy management, their own mood management, all of that requires full processing and respect so they can then integrate that information and share it with us later. So if we were to think about, the neurobiology of the AuDHD child, and we were to paint it with a one-size-fits-all attitude, we would be wrong there. It would not be helpful. What is helpful is learning to give the child room to form self-trust, to honor themselves, to learn about themselves, and to listen to themselves. Now, when I speak about themselves, there are a bunch of different forms of communication. Remember, I spoke about this. Without relaxation, there's no communication. Without communication, there is no relaxation. And that statement seems to be about balance and harmony in the body, where we have the nervous system and the brain networks working in harmony at their optimum. So an AuDHD child, which we're all very much aware of, has a lot of activity going on the underneath, right? But that activity is useful information. It's a form of communication that brings safety to their nervous system if given time and attention. And even more so, if given time, attention, and we allow them to interpret, feel it, and understand it from their own perspective as well. So, relationship to self extends further today in this session when we talk about bringing harmony between the nervous system, the brain, and the evolution of the child. Now, the word evolution means to progress, right? To evolve, to become more. And what hopefully we achieve in this conversation today is a sense of this more inside of AuDHD children. We're not presupposing that their immediate state is one we have to quell, suppress, discipline, or label, because all we are really experiencing there is our own perception of information. Information that is being either translated improperly or coming out incorrectly or in an imbalanced way. And that can all be corrected. And then once that is, the information improves. The flow of that information starts to inform the child and consequently then inform their choices, their behavior, their well-being, their confidence, and their progression for the future. Right? Do we see what I mean? Communication and relaxation seem to be very key here. So children and nervous system regulation. A healthy body is a relaxed one. Currently, schools don't keep children relaxed and distract them from listening to and honouring their own body's messages. No time, no attention. And anyone who's here with me at the minute, think back to any time in school where you were not given enough time either to complete something, understand something, or address your own response to something you were given. Right? Your experience of learning there is then fractured. And the reason why this learning is fractured is because we see learning as an A to B process. And as a result of mainstream schooling, and it's not an A to B process. It is A, B, C, D, F, Y, H, J, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, and all thrown across the one big sheet going in various different directions, right? Learning is about connections, right? And we make connections through experience. And in mainstream schools right now, those environments do not support AuDHD children making connections healthily, because the assumption is that learning is about rote memorization, that it is about repeating old information, and not, in fact, this other form of learning, which I think is the key now for the way schools can possibly, this is just my own perception, progress overall for the future. When we look at future schools, we look at learning instead as how a child assimilates, comprehends, and flexibly adapts or applies new information. Part of that new information will be the new information we receive about them through their own experience of themselves. So I want us to be present to this idea that new information will be predominant inside of the schools of the future, and the ability to assimilate flexibly, which means just to integrate it all, like take it all in, comprehend it, apply it in various different ways, unique, new, refreshing ways. That is learning. And the idea of rote memorization, if we want to get really practical about this and logical about this, we think about AI. And I used to have a very, very, very negative perception of AI, right? I used to really feel uncomfortable about it because I thought, well, if AI is going to replace the assimilation of new information, right, i.e. child creativity, and we'll lose something terrible. What I actually foresee now, and this, I might be wrong on this, but this is what I'm perceiving, that AI will take over the rote memorization part, and then we get to play with what we're given then. We get to play with this research, the knowledge, the information, and we create with it. So a child's learning is about flexibility, adaptability. And if we think about the image behind me here, if you look at my screen, there's a brain, right? And we think of neural pathways opening, right? Lots of different connections being made at once in a very fast pace, right? That's what new information does, right? Forms new grey matter, all the rest of that. In a child's school life or learning life, they also require experiences for this new information to form. And the environment means everything there. And how we use time and the environment, very, very important. So things that help, right, for keeping a child relaxed and keeping them listening to their own bodies at the same time. Communication, relaxation, relaxation, communication. Sensory-friendly environments, choice and options, trust from adults to try new things, regular, responsible connection with others. Now, here's another thing that's come through that I think might be really interesting when we talk about AuDHD children and the learning process, right? So it's relating, playing, learning. The beauty of the AuDHD child is their loving focus on others. They pay lots and lots of attention to those around them. This is natural and part of their process for growing up, and not just people around them, but everything around them. They are constantly making links and connections. And this is part of that new way of looking at learning, right? Where learning is now about new information and the assimilation of old information into something new, right? Also, the way that a child is flexible and adaptable to new environments, new experiences, all of this is learning, right? And when we start to see learning as that, our perception of AuDHD changes, right? Because when we see learning in that way, they're actually perfectly designed for learning. And this is the thing that has been eluded everyone for a very long time. The AuDHD child loves to learn in this way. The AuDHD child loves to learn when it is framed in the way that I have just framed it. Okay. So through this attention in early years, they become adaptable, flexible, open, honest, and brave. The two-thirds rule, which is new stuff here, it's not coming from anywhere else, in infant and junior years is very important. AuDHD children can learn two-thirds of their time from their own bodies, their own surroundings, and from each other. The other third, they learn from us as facilitators, guides, and models, models being an active word there, of what's true, right, and worthy to learn. So if we think about school environments and learning environments at home as well, you know, two-thirds of what is really being integrated, assimilated, and made into new information by a child is what they are getting from their own experiences, from themselves, from their connection to others, their own surroundings, and the experiences that they're put through. Learning is not happening on paper. Learning is active. Learning happens within them all the time. So default mode network and learning integration. Now this idea gripped me about a week ago, right? And I couldn't let it go, right? And I understand a little bit now of why. And I'm going to share a little bit of this and see if this relates, if this is relevant to you, if you respond well to this information. So, wow, did anyone hear that crazy noise or was that just me, right? There's some children playing in the background, right, with an open window behind me. I am in my room just now at a desk, right? And I don't know what they're doing down there, but it sounds like it's a rude noise, right? And I'm going to try really hard not to get distracted and just go back to what I'm doing, which is sort of, no, definitely going to get distracted. Hang on one second. Hmm. Wow. Okay. Wow. Now, I'm going to hope that you can't hear that because it's a very rude noise. And I do apologize profusely. It is not at all appropriate for this video. No. The human mind has a background setting called a default mode network. This reminds me of my old year 11 class. They were really badly behaved, and I'd always have to get really, really formal and start using really serious voices very loudly to get them to go back to what they were supposed to be doing. Right? So it is in fact integral, which means very important, to the assimilation and integration of learning. The default mode network is called the background setting, but I don't really believe it is, right? Because when you look more deeply at the default mode network, it is basically where the assimilation of new information or the creation of new information is happening. It's how we relate to the world. When a child is in a state that I spoke about from Dr. Joseph Delaney, right? It's the idea of adaptive stress response in the body. If a child has been in an extended period of stress for a long time, this particular part of the brain, it doesn't so much go offline as go to sleep, right? Is the sort of softest way of describing it. And it's the place where they have clear boundary between self and other, and they can interpret the world from a sense of self that is stable. And they see the boundary between themselves and another. If for a long time in their early years, a child is in a state of stress for an extended period, this part of the brain that gives them their sense of self, that they work out their sense of self from, actually goes to sleep, and they then have no sense of self and consequently start to form a self based on the immediate experience around them. It's a survival state, right? And it's extremely uncomfortable. And if I'm not mistaken, sounds a lot like masking. Now, what's lovely about this is it can be corrected. Interesting that, isn't it? I seem to be saying a lot about this, right? I seem to be talking a lot about things that can change. And our perception of AuDHD is very fixed, like something that can't be changed, that has to be managed. No, there's more to what I'm communicating here, and I hope we are all listening. So it creates a sense of self and other and encourages dreaming, thinking about ourself, and reflection. Now, the interesting part of default mode network is that it competes with other networks when a child is in an environment where it's supposed to focus. I believe that state, right, when the default mode network is actively engaged in the learning at the same time as the other parts of the brain, and we don't fight the default mode network, we allow it to assimilate and we allow it to sort of govern or at least influence the time that is allocated to any activity. The child absorbs the information better, learns better, relates it to themselves more, and also becomes acquainted with their own learning and experience in such a way that helps them form a sense of who they are. It is very beautiful, this part of the brain. And yes, it does want to disrupt, right? When other forms of brain network are focusing in a goal-oriented setting. And it doesn't like it when it can't relate the information to itself and will continue to disrupt learning, right? It'll just continue to disrupt and get the child to get more and more and more and more and more distracted because the default mode network's going meh, 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 and kind of freaking out in the background, right? But what's actually happening there is that the default mode network is giving us information, right? It's indicating to us that whatever the child is being put through here is improper for its nature. And when we look at mainstream education is goal-oriented, fact-based, and fragments out learning into these set tasks that have to be completed in limited time frames. Default mode network doesn't like it at all. Poor child's bored to death and is looking at this and going, this doesn't relate to me or my life. I cannot connect. There is no emotional connection either. And another fun fact, right, that is very important for everyone listening, we do our best learning when there is an emotional response, right? When there is an emotional experience happening in the classroom or learning environment. I'll never say classroom again, I hate classrooms, right? In the learning environment. That's when children learn more deeply. That's when core memories are formed. That's when a sense of self is established because something in them relates really deeply to what's happening and feels very deeply. And in order to feel deeply, guess what they have to be? Relaxed, right? So there's a bunch of stuff I said there, right, that is not on this slide, but is somewhat on this slide, and I'm just sort of giving us this information, seeing where it lands. Okay, so I'm going to shush now. So more time in this state means learning deepens and is more connected to the child as they make it make sense from within them. So as I said before, learning is not rote memorization or on paper. Learning happens within us with the assimilation of information, transforming it into new information and creating from that space, right? Continually new flexibility, adaptability, change, transformation, growth, right? That's what learning is, right? And this state is most active during playtime. When a child is doing nothing except enjoying themselves or in a rested state, this is when the default mode network is most active. Any millennial parent who is listening, I would like you to track back to your yesteryear, the times gone by, the golden period whereby we used to buy albums on a CD, right? And it can't just have been just me did this, right? But I had a lilac and green bedroom. And my lilac and green bedroom had, it was just beautiful. I remember this bedroom so much. I had like, it smelled really good. I can't remember why. Probably candles. I have a whole thing about candles. In a sensory way, my room matched me perfectly and was very, very beautiful and perfect and just made me feel amazing, my room. And I used to just play CDs on repeat on a loop. And whilst I'm playing those CDs, the default mode network in my mind is deeply active and I'm dreaming, I'm processing, I'm feeling emotion. There's all sorts of stuff that's coming up there. And yet I look like I'm doing nothing particularly at all. And at the same time, am I still processing the music? Am I still hearing lyrics? Am I still remembering things from the songs? Yeah. But there's this whole other thing going on, this amazing absorption occurring that then can be transformed, regurgitated, created into something new later, right? So you will understand this. Right? Freedom for children, health for the body. So, from what's been shared here, slower learning, project-based work, time in nature, and child-led, choice-based experiential adventures, which include relating to others, all of this is part of living. So, if we look at where this learning from within is actually occurring, it's happening inside of the child, it's where they grow to understand themselves and experience themselves and they become more. They're relating to others is intrinsically tied to their ability to play, to explore, to be in things with other people. And the idea of a subject being separate from these experiences, like you have English, maths, geography, science, the child's not organizing this information inside of themselves with those topics, you understand. They have an experience, like say this is just an example, they're building a boat with their friends. One of their best friends is painting the boat blue. Another one is doing something else. Another one is doing something else. And they have chosen, by their own choosing, a specific task. So they're engaged in that task. While they're doing so, they may also have an environment around them that is teaching them about boats and sailing and fish and being outside, communicating with others, learning about others. They're learning what they're good at, what they're not good at. They're noticing what they like to choose, what they don't like to choose. There are lots of conversations ongoing because of the shared goal they all have. This is learning, and it is also play. This is living, and it is also growing up. This is the type of project-based work that in a school learning environment, right, is sorely lacking currently. However, with Sincerity School, we are aiming to bring these project-based, child-led, choice-based experiential adventures to children so they are exposed to beautiful things. Now, obviously, more interested than building a boat. Like they might go out into a forest and build a bee kingdom. I don't know what a bee kingdom is, right? But if it involves honey flowers, color, collecting leaves, and possibly painting eggs, then I'm all for it. Do you know what I mean? There are lots of different ways that play and integration of multiple forms of living education can be informative and influential to a child in these formative years where they are becoming their full self. In a sentence, we cannot separate children from the becoming of themselves and their learning journey. And unfortunately, so far, that's exactly what we have been doing to our children. They have been in schools where they're learning about themselves, is secondary to life, is barely considered as a whole, and is in fact put aside or punished if expressed. And yet, the way that the brain is designed, it is necessary for real learning and evolution and relaxation and healthy balance and communication between all the facets of a human body and a mind to work together if that learning is relative and relates to the child themselves, and we give the child room to relate to and connect to their experiences as they grow, to make sense of them for themselves, rather than dictate how they should take in information, what form that information should be, and then consequently test them on that information, which is always regurgitation of the old. So there's a bunch of stuff coming through here that's a lot, right? But I will be doing multiple sessions on this and I hope it's useful so far, right? So what does a living curriculum look like? So I'll repeat this again. Slower learning, project-based work, time in nature, and child-led, choice-based experiential adventures, which include relating to others. All of this is part of living. A curriculum in a school which presents living as its day-to-day will enrich a child and their body with enough replenishment, stimulation, and personal reflection to allow them to grow up healthy, happy, and free to be themselves. I will be back in the coming days with a second or third part of this, and we will look at connection to others more deeply on, we'll talk about interrelation, how children learn from each other through their living curriculum, and then also how we can support that kind of learning, right? And what we need to prioritize differently to the learning that's prioritized now in mainstream schools in order for them to become whole, happy, healthy children. I haven't once mentioned dysfunction in AuDHD. Instead, I am speaking of the dysfunction inside of the society that makes it hard to be AuDHD in the world. But if we listen with our hearts of hearts, from our hearts of hearts, and we ask ourselves from the deepest place, right? Does this make sense? Anything I've said here, does it land really comfortably? Like, I wish I'd had that experience. Then it's probably right for you, and I would like to see you again. Thank you so much for listening. If indeed you would like to um, speak to me more at any point, right? Or if you would like to um, contribute to the next session that I do hold. If there's any opinions on what's come up here, you want to have a chat with me about Sincerity School and what we're doing there. Or even if you are in education, right? Or interested in this topic and you want to be part of the school building, please do get in touch. It's Shanine Freel at sincerityschool.com on the email, right? And I'll pop it up somewhere on the video here. It's really enriching and interesting when we start to process the idea, perhaps, that the AuDHD child is flawless. And it is, in fact, the systems that we are attempting to shove them into and the stuff we're trying to shove inside of them that's causing them harm, right? What's naturally there within them wants to come out, and they are naturally inclined towards learning, and they are inclined towards learning that fits them perfectly as well. And if we just give them a bit more room, right, we might find that the nervous system and the well-being and the moods and the expression of self, all of that starts to improve exponentially for the future. Thanks for listening. Oh, communication. No communication without relaxation. No relaxation without communication. Nano, nano. Bye.